can contain a large amount of text, most authors will want to split large spaces into more manageable parts. Just add an unusual character where you want each writing space to end and choose Explode from the menu. I cut up the quilt, creating a new copy of each paragraph in its own writing space. The exploded spaces are all created inside a new writing space, a very well-shaped girl, which I stuffed with cotton wadding. But Oja was more interested just then in the Patchwork girl's brains. Thinking it unkind to deprive her of any good qualities that were handy, the boy took down every bottle on the shelf and poured some of the contents in Margolada's dish. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet, a personage known as a proper woman. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes. The glass cat was lying before the mirror, and the Patchwork girl lay limp and lifeless upon the bench. The magician leaned over and shook from the bottle some grains of the wonderful powder, and they fell directly on the Patchwork girl's head and arms. My candle was nearly burnt out when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. I think I'm going to leave this section now and head back upstream to the overview and take you into part of the story that I wanted to explore, because like the section we visited earlier where written and sewn origin myths stand in parallel, this story section, which is in some ways the most linear section of my text, is actually composed of 2 parallel threads that occasionally meet and then diverge again. And you could characterize them roughly as more or less the same circumstances from a point of view resisting multiplicity and a point of view celebrating it, which will make more sense probably if I actually read a piece of it. Let me see if I can find a section that makes sense of that. So by this point, the Frankenstein monster has left Mary Shelley and traveled to America and wound up in the company of a spiritualist whose seances she attends, and has been befriended by a young sailor named Chansey. And here you see that there are 2 sections, both called Revelations, and they're very close, but not quite the same. I'll read one of them, and then most of another. Okay. Revelations. One night I was alone in my room, but for the armadillo, which napped contentedly on an armchair. As the fire was hot, I had stripped bare and was striding about, orating from a book I held in one hand. The exultant noise I made drowned out the sound of Chansey's knock and creaking of hinges. It was finally a shadow that, darting across the ceiling, gave him away. I spun round, alarming the armadillo, and saw Chansey in the doorway. I huddled away from him, hiding the scars on my chest. Yet I knew the firelight shone glancingly across my domed back, and the shadows of the raised scars would mark my skin deeply. There was no way to repair the damage done, to extract the knowledge from Chansey's eyes. As I shrank and crouched, I seemed to myself like an insect hiding from the descending rag in a crack too small to contain my too many knees, my restless antennae, my stiff and chitinous back. It was unbearable. Staring square into Chansey's expressionless face, I stood up and turned so that the light shone full on my front and my shadow stretched back all the way across the room and up the wall. I intended to propel him from the room with my contempt. I was starting toward him when he delivered a funny little bow and then did something strange. He took off his shirt, then his pants, his shoes, his underthings. He stood revealed in front of me. Chansey was a woman. Now, this is the parallel text, and it's much the same except for the opening, One night I was alone in my room, poring over my own body for signs of degeneration, as had become an obsession with me after the incident at the seance. I crouched close to the fire, enduring the heat for the sake of the brightest light. I pulled at the skin, trying to bring my scars directly under my eyes, but often the changeable flames frustrated my aim, and a shadow would chase across me just as I seemed to make something out. I was absorbed in unspeakable worries and heard and saw nothing until the shadow of the door darting across the ceiling caught my attention. I spun round and saw Chansey in the doorway. So both these sections then advance to oh wait, no, that's not true. Sorry. In one section, her response is to laugh, and in the other section, her response is wary and fearful. In one section, they have sex, and in the other section, they part in mutual distrust. But in both cases, after they part, we move to an accident. As she walks out the door, and a pair of horses veered toward me out of the darkness. They were wild-eyed, snorting steam. Something happened to my balance. A horse's great head struck me a glancing blow, and I fell under stamping hooves. Tumult, yelling, a horse's frightened whinny. Rumbling and shadow as the cab passed over me. I saw light glint off the steel rim of the wheel just inches from my face, or so it seemed. Then the commotion was on down the street and diminishing. I saw my leg, an impossible distance from me. I looked up from the street and saw Chansey in silhouette against the light from the door. Then she turned, and I saw her face showing alarm, and something stranger. It came to me that she thought I had thrown myself intentionally in the cabbie's path. Or had she seen something amiss in the way my leg and I parted company? Was there a right way to go to pieces? I called to her placatingly. She closed the door and left me there. Windows and doors banged open all down the street. A terror of discovery came over me, an unreasonable emotion. I'd been run over by a careless cabbie. What was my error in that? Aside from the sizable but not punishable one of dashing careless like a galoot into the traffic. But terror I did feel, and in the shadow in which I lay, I gathered myself to my 1 foot and hopped away from the noise and the lights. The sound of 1 foot hopping. Is it different from the sound of 2 feet, striding with resolve? Echoing off the walls of the narrow alley, it seemed so to me. I dared not continue in this manner, so I hid by a dustbin where a congenial tramp shared his cardboard with me. Her leg is found. They hold a funeral for it. And she makes her escape, moving on, traveling west, and moves into the present day, I would say. I had the conviction that if I believed hard enough, I could erase my history and be made new. My past, I thought, was just a nasty habit of thought, subject to will. On the one hand, it was more fixed than the likable present or the standoffish future. Moments turned into furniture, or rather whole living room sets and flowered chintz, an arranged familiarity, homey turned stifling. On the other hand, files could be erased, photos snipped, journal entries revised into seemliness. The past was like a smell. You could ignore it, you could cover it up, you could try to outdistance it, or you could go to the source, rip up the rotten linoleum, douse it with toxins, floral, and citrus. Maybe my mistake was believing I could pull myself together with the instruments of surgery, scissoring out anomalies, cut and paste past, but I thought I could grow into my oneness. Lacking past altogether, though, wasn't safe. It was too easy to slide around on that glossy Arctic surface that held so many reflections and release them just as easily. I wanted a past with abundant nooks and textures, impossible to slip on or fall through. So she attempts to put herself together to become whole, and the result is not good. After wandering for months on my strengthening limbs, I fetched up at a gas station just this side of Death Valley, a place as far removed in kind from my birthplace as can be. In the mobile home where I live, I've set up a writing desk. I'm writing some things down, but often I strap on my laptop computer and go out. The people passing through don't go far from the road, which for them is like a rope stretched across a void, not until they reach Death Valley, which I understand is to be undergone, which is considered harshly salubrious and an accomplishment, do they venture onto the desert pavement, so I can wander unobserved. I'm camel enough to stay alert on the hottest days. A kind of delirium of the material world is a greater danger. Sometimes I'm seduced by the sand, the rocks, the dry, truculent plants, into believing a stubborn blank thingness is the last meaningful state exactly because it depends on nothing. Then I want to rip my own self apart, dry into hard shreds of jerky with an insinuating stink, divvied up by ants. But I remind myself that I've been carrion before. I've known what it's like to be convinced of one thing, decay. Then I was thrown into movement and doubt and movement will be my life as long as it lasts. I think I'll end there.